Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first training session for what we've dubbed Comms-a-Palooza, which is a 4-part training series to help our partners around the country to gain useful skills and training in the areas of communications. And the first one is this OpEd workshop that Katie, Fernisi, and myself will be conducting today. And we're looking forward to helping you all sort of learn to flex your persuasive writing muscles. So first things first, what is an OpEd? OpEd stands for opposite editorial, which fun fact, that name is a relic of the print newspaper days. Typically in a print newspaper, they would have the fold in the middle, and on one side of the fold would be the editorial page. Those are the opinions that officially belonged to the newspaper, and they weren't signed by any specific author. They were the official stances of the newspaper. So a prototypical editorial would be, say, the Washington Post endorses X candidate for X public office. That's the official stance of the paper. And then opposite the editorial would be an individual opinion piece from a notable member of the community, somebody who's qualified to speak on that, and somebody who has an opinion that may or may not differ from that of the newspaper itself, an opinion that the newspaper feels is worth valuing and comes from outside the publication. So that's what we're working to construct today. An op-ed has plenty of uses and tools. It's a great advocacy tool to reach a large audience. Elected officials pay attention to them, especially when they gain traction. Today, the social media is such a tool, a lot of them end up going viral or semi-viral. And it's a great way to get your message into publications that likely voters and your constituency will likely read, and sort of plant a flag on a certain stance that not only conveys your message, but sort of rides the credibility and reach of the publication that it's printed in. And typically they're pretty short. You got to make your point. Depending on the publication, they'll have guidelines. Usually it's around 500 to 700 words. Sometimes it's even shorter. Sometimes they'll let you go for about 1,000, but in my opinion, the best ones tend to be 800 words or less. And if you can't make your point by then, it either should be an academic paper or you got to work on your writing a little bit. So as we're going through this, we're going to work together to construct our own sort of mini op-ed outline. And the goal for today is for each of you to come away from this with some of the basic elements you need to construct your own op-ed, and then hopefully use those elements and maybe some of the ideas that come from some of the other participants in order to construct an op-ed that works for your local context and community, which we can then help you, work with you to help place in a local or potentially national publication, depending on what the angle is. So the questions you want to ask before writing an op-ed are threefold. What is the purpose of this op-ed? What is the topic of our op-ed? And who is our audience? Now, we're going to go ahead and fill in the answer to the first question, since that is the title of this op-ed workshop. That was the stated purpose of this, which is to build power in our local communities through democratic engagement. But the second two questions, those are sort of up for grabs. And I thought that would be a good place for our first discussion. So if you want to come off mute or put your answers in the chat, what is a topic of an op-ed that you'd like to write? So what societal problem do you hope to solve or address? And for what audience would that op-ed be? Would you be writing for local community members, elected officials, leaders at your institution, whichever you prefer? So yeah, anyone want to be brave and take a stab?
One that I've done a lot of research on, that I'm really popular, that it's really popular right now, and I've done a lot on it, is misinformation and using a media literacy course as a way to prevent that. So it can go a few different ways, but for the sake of the practice assignment, I would say the audience would be higher ed, and the topic would be why you should have a media literacy course as part of your general education requirements.
I like that. That's good. I like that. That's how that's a sort of specific problem gets at a narrow focus, because that often helps you make a more powerful argument. Any other topics or problems that we'd want to address? I see one in the chat, mental illness. That's an interesting one. Tavian, am I pronouncing your, first, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Is that something you'd care to expand on?
Tavian. So I just got in here like a little bit late, so I'm not entirely sure if mental illness would be able to work within this. Am I wrong to say that?
I think almost anything can work if we feel like it's by solving the problem, by addressing the problem, we can build local power in our communities. And if it touches on democratic engagement. So how might we bridge that gap then between mental illness and democratic engagement?
That would be difficult. Yeah, I would have to think a lot more on that.
All right. Well, I don't think necessarily it's impossible split, but it might be a little bit tough to square with the current topic. Off the top of my head, some of the other potential issues that we might want to address in order to build local power through democratic engagement are, say, issues of voting access on the college campus, for example, arguing for putting a polling place on campus. That could be directed at either elected officials or leaders at your institution. It could be something as simple as sort of imploring students at your institution to become more engaged by joining a local voting coalition, or doing more to support student voting as a cause in general. And that one would be directed toward fellow students or local community members. The point is, there's really any which way you can go about this. And the more the issue means to you, the more that you're involved with it, the more personal it is to you, the better. So moving on to the next slide. Let's see. So
I think this slide is going to transition over into Katie.
Awesome, thanks. Yep, happy to pick it up there. So, I think it's always a good way to get started with an op-ed. Traditional way is what we call the lead. And usually one of the best ways is to take something that's in the news, that's kind of current, people are reading about it, talking about it. These are things you might see as you scroll through your social media feeds, or you might be talking about with friends or hearing others have conversations about it. Today, for example, Congress had the third January 6th committee hearing. So that's something that is relevant and in the news, and something that people are talking about. But you could also just use this. It doesn't have to be political. It doesn't have to be just what's in the news. It could be related to a sports event that kind of connects to either an individual or your topic in some way. It can be in any kind of field, not necessarily politics. So just kind of think about something that would make your reader or yourself, when you're reading the news, what would grab your attention, what would be an interesting topic, and try to just focus it on what's relevant here and now. If it's something from history, for example, you could try to tie into something that's happening today. And we'll have an example here in just a little bit to go over so you can kind of see that for yourself. But then kind of, as you might be used to in school, right after you have your introduction, use your news hook. This thing just happened. I'm going to tell you about what my argument is. Go ahead and make your argument right at the top, and make sure it's clear, it's concise, and right away from the beginning, people understand what you're writing about and what you are trying to persuade them to either do or think. So we'll go ahead to the next slide. All right, a couple more notes there for you on that. An example here. I don't know, Danny, if you had a specific point in mind on that one.
Right, so there should be an example op-ed that maybe Fernicio can share in the chat. Yes, okay. So we skipped the step, which is all right. So there's Fernicio just shared an example in Washington Post op-ed, which was written co-authored by E.J. Dionne, who is a Washington Post columnist, and Miles Rappaport, who is the former president of Common Cause, arguing for universal voting. And the idea behind this op-ed is basically for arguing for the government to put in place measures that would get 100% of all citizens to turn out to vote. And the plan was to ask everybody to skim through the first few paragraphs of this op-ed and identify the lead and thesis. So you'll see here that we kind of gave it away. But if you look in the very first line, there is the first step to ending our voting wars is to recognize that every citizen should play a role in shaping our nation's destiny. And so if we analyze that, that's an attention-grabbing sentence. It references our voting wars, which is the ongoing local voting legislation that is going on at the state level throughout the country, changing levels of voting access and in most cases restricting them. So that's your news hook, what makes this timely. And yeah. And then they quickly transition to the thesis, which is breaking the cycle requires a game changer. We propose universal voting. So that's their statement of argument. So yeah. So quick question, which is, I'd be interested, what do you all think of the lead and the news and the thesis? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Is it effective? If you want to maybe put in the chat, a plus for good or minus for bad or something like that. Be interested in your thoughts.
We have some, looks like agreements coming into the chat.
We have some commentary here from Quanzel. Direct and with urgency. That's key. If you open up an article and you see that lead, the first step toward ending our voting wars is to recognize that every citizen should play a role in shaping our nation's destiny. It's probably catching your attention, which is exactly what a lead ought to do. Gives you an idea of where they're going, and it's got you reading. So let's see. Moving on to the next slide. So now we're ready to start building our own op-eds using the purpose and topic and audience that we established before. So remember, our purpose is to build local power through democratic engagement, and our topic and audience is something that we can each choose for ourselves. Phoenicia has just put a link to a Jamboard into the chat. And if you could take 2 minutes on both page 1 and 2, so 4 minutes total, to answer the first 2 questions on the Jamboard, please don't worry about composing anything very eloquent. It's all about getting your thoughts down quickly and just what comes to your mind. Then we can start building our own op-ed. For those of you who haven't used a Jamboard before, all you have to do is copy one of the notepads on the left side of each slide and then drag your notepad over to an open space on the board where you can write your answer. So we're going to set the timer now for 4 minutes, starting now. Okay, we've got 2 more minutes. Okay, time to wrap up. And Pernicio, want to give a recap of some of the answers we saw on pages 1 and 2?
Sorry, I could probably do that if I wasn't on mute. Let me come off mute here. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick recap of the first couple slides, and we're going to start with the lead slide. So I'm seeing some really interesting things like the youth voting rate is low. Why? Current legislation makes it virtually accessible. Also, more about youth vote. Supporting the youth vote is critical to building an inclusive democracy. Young people are the future. Will democracy be part of that future? More about voter access. So voting should be more accessible to individuals who don't have easy methods of transportation, make voting possible online. When students are not able to participate in elections, their voices are silenced. This is a direct threat to our democracy. So there are more leads here about young people in voting, voter access, and the like. And so moving on to slide 2. I'm seeing just a few theses here, and we have everyone should vote in order to gain equal representation within the United States. Young people voting and engaging with democracy in this simple way increases their political voice and change-making ability. And then the other that we have here is we must find ways to engage and protect younger voters to have a representative democracy.
All right, we're off to a great start. So now that we've gotten our intros down, we're going to get into the body of our op-ed, sorry. And I'll let Katie take over the next couple.
Awesome, thanks. So now that you've grabbed your reader's attention, you've told them what you're talking about and kind of what your main argument is. Now you've got to back up that argument. So there's a number of ways you could do that. But you could use quotes from someone who's an expert in the topic area or who would be credible on the topic. You could use statistics or poll numbers. There's a variety of different things you could do. Sometimes it's just about kind of showing examples of what you're talking about. So lots of different ways to do that, but you just want to make sure that the claims that you're making, you have some support for them. So people, when they read your op-ed, they can say, oh, okay, here's some factual information to base that on. And so I think, are we sticking with the op-ed, the Washington Post op-ed for this? All right, so I think if everyone wants to just go back to the Washington Post op-ed that we were using in the beginning, and take a look at that. And Fernicia has put that link back at the bottom of the chat if you're looking for that. So one example here is about the 4th big paragraph down. It says universal voting takes seriously the Declaration of Independence, insistent that government is legitimate only when it is based on the consent of the governed. The founders did not say some of the governed, even 66.8%. So this just talks about, including everyone in our government in order to live up to the promise that our founders made when they wrote the Constitution. So that's just one example from this op-ed here. And then just thinking about your own op-ed, we've got the hook, the lead, and the thesis. Now it's time to start thinking about your own, what you would use for evidence and analysis. So if you want to go back to the Jamboard and then include there on the sticky notes And Bernice has put the link to the Jamboard there again. I know we're asking you guys to go to lots of different places, back and forth. But go ahead and think about what on page 3, what you might use. You might not have the evidence today in front of you, the actual quote or number or example that you might use, but just sort of generally go ahead and use the sticky notes there to think through what you might want to use, what kind of sources or things you'd look for your own op-ed. And I'm not sure if, Bernice, is there a time limit on this one?
So we're going to give everybody 3 minutes. And like Katie said, we did not expect you all to come in here with fully done research and say interviewed community members, but think about what types of information may be useful to support your point. So what type of people you would want to be quoting, what type of experts you may talk to, what kind of information such as your campus's voting rate or the accessibility of polling places on campus. What kind of information would you want to be able to prove your point? And as many examples as you can come up with, the more the merrier. And just like with the lead-in thesis, this is a quick hitting thing. We're not looking for full eloquence or a well put together research paper. We want it off the top of your mind. What's occurring to you in this moment? We're going to give everybody 3 minutes. Start the timer now. One minute. In 30 seconds, we should be wrapping up. Ten seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Pencils down. Happy New Year. Bernice, you want to give us a recap of some of the highlights on the Jamboard?
Yeah, sure can. So some of the highlights from the Jamboard, pieces of evidence and analysis that would support your thesis. So I see a lot of current population survey data, census data. Those are 2 that I'm seeing more than a couple times. Also, we have show statistics of how restrictive voting data impacts diverse communities, further disenfranchising already marginalized youth voters. Says data showing how the youth vote had changed the outcome of previous elections, even local elections. Public opinions, values of people categorized by demographics compared to the opinions, values reflected in legislation. And then another one that I will uplift, I think I saw it. Yeah, so using the national study on learning, voting, and engagement, and then finding a stat that would follow that, but using that as a source. This person does not have their thesis yet, but noted that that would be a source that they could go to.
Great, thank you very much. And it sounds like we are well on our way. These are some really smart pieces of evidence and analysis that would really help build a strong argument. So now that we've covered the intro and the body, we're already moving fast toward the end of our piece. So the next question we need to answer is, how do you end an op-ed? And there are two elements to this. The first is addressing critiques. Every argument has weaknesses or drawbacks, either real or perceived, and addressing them in your argument. By doing so within your argument, within your op-ed, you strengthen your op-ed against both present and future opposition. So for an example here, we have from the Washington Post op-ed, one obvious question about any movement or legislation that would require 100% of Americans to vote is whether such a measure is constitutional. So you'll see here in this example that the two authors, E.J. Dionne and Miles Rappaport, take this question on head on. They straight out say it, is this proposal constitutional? And then they go on to explain why it is. So if you'll read the italicized example, you can get a sense of how they're addressing some of the potential critiques to their argument. Okay, so now we are going to go back to our Jamboard, and I want each of you to take 2 minutes and think of some potential weaknesses or critiques that you'll need to address in order to shore up your argument and make it as strong as possible. What are some holes that people who disagree with you, or maybe only mostly agree with you, might try to poke in your argument, and how might you shore those up? You've got 2 minutes. Next page on the Jamboard, starting now. One minute. Thirty seconds. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So everybody out of the Jamboard, and Phoenicia, you want to give us a quick recap?
Yeah, super quick here. So I see Things like there would be a higher chance of possible hacking of the voting system if we were able to vote online. Increasing mail-in voting may favor one party over the other. We would need to provide research that this isn't true. Young people are not informed, experienced enough to responsibly engage in democracy, and getting a polling place on campus does not guarantee engagement, and it will not help people that have not registered to vote or need more voting knowledge. So those are some of the key takeaways.
I love pretty much all of these. And a lot of these are things that I've actually heard personally from people reacting to what I say I do for a living. So this is great, and this is spot on. And these are exactly the kind of things that you guys need to be working to address. So loving what we're seeing here. And I think we're well on our way. So the next stage to ending an op-ed is a conclusion. You want to end any good piece of persuasive writing with something memorable. And the key to a good conclusion is you want to circle back to your thesis, summarizing your main point, while also drawing a connection to the broader community. You want to leave readers with a clear understanding of why the change that you're advocating for is good for them and why it matters. You don't want anybody to leave your op-ed thinking, cool, but this isn't important. You want it to stick in their minds. So here, we have the example from the Washington Post op-ed, and you'll see that they don't just say that it's good for the United States to have 100% voter turnout. They talk about the broader importance of democracy on a global scale. They say it is time to think anew. Our nation should make clear that it takes the rights and responsibilities of every citizen seriously. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has called forth an extraordinary global alliance on behalf of democratic self-determination. This is a moment for the United States to embrace its commitment to democracy and self-rule, not only in what we say, but also in how we govern ourselves. So they're connecting this not just to the American democracy, but the dominant global story happening right now. So now it's your chance. We're going to give you another 2 minutes. We're going to go to the next page on the Jamboard. Remember, you do not have to be perfectly eloquent. We're not looking for Shakespeare in 2 minutes, but just jot down how you might end your op-ed. How might you conclude? What broader point might you make? How might you circle that back to your thesis? You've got 2 minutes starting now. One minute. Thirty seconds. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So Bernice, do you want to give us one last recap?
Sure. So it looks like we have young people are the future. The decisions made from elections today will forever affect us. So we must advocate for the ability to vote in ways best for us. I like that. Citizens vote for leaders to represent themselves and their ideas. So skipping out on voting is keeping your voice from being heard. So why does this matter? The ability of our youngest citizens to shape the future depends on their ability to engage deeply with the socio-scientific issues of our time. Young people are a huge percentage of the population and they are not being represented. And then this person also included a snappy one-line version. Democracy doesn't work when it doesn't reflect our country. Then I'm seeing more echoes of citizens vote for leaders to represent themselves. Let's see how students, including students in elections, is essential. And yeah.
Love that. Incredibly impressive, especially for the 2-minute timeline. These are all really good. All right, so I'm going to give the floor back to Katie, who's going to take us through some tips from her experience writing op-eds.
Awesome. Yeah, I will just repeat. Those were really, really great conclusions there. So great work, everybody. So just quick tips here. I'll run through them, but definitely feel free to ask any questions at the end. First tip is just to make it personal. This just make someone care about what they're reading. They've taken the time to sit down and read, and you want to make sure that they're invested. And a great way to do that is to tell a story, invoke an experience, just do whatever you can to make it readable and relevant. Audiences really respond to accessible content like that. And it's something that editors look for too, in particular. And editors are kind of the ones who are reading a lot of these submissions and deciding what their readers might be most interested in. And I think, the second one, just make it local, which is another way of saying, to make it relevant to the community. So what you might say to a community in California might be very different than what you might say about voting to a community in Georgia. So, and most outlets are looking for, even if it's a national issue, they're really looking to see how it relates to the local community in particular. So whatever you can do to just localize it and help people understand the impact to the community. Next one is choose the right author. So on any given topic, some messengers are going to have greater credibility. They're going to be more persuasive, and it just kind of depends on who your target audience is. And so, when you're thinking about who should be the author for the op-ed, a good question to ask is just who is your audience? Who are you trying to talk to? Who are you trying to convince? And who does your audience respect? Who do they ignore? Who's someone they really listen to? And then choose the right messenger. Sorry, I think I just confused the author and messenger, but author is kind of the local person, someone who's they're going to know, maybe they've heard of, they've read about, maybe it's a local official, maybe it's a community leader. And then the messenger is the one who is going to have the persuasive piece and credibility with the local community. And then, be sure to argue the point strongly and powerfully. So, this is not a time to say, I see all sides of the argument. On the one hand, this is true. On the other hand, I can also see this argument. You really want to zero in on what you're trying to argue and make sure that is taking up the bulk of the op-ed. We did go over the piece at the end about addressing your criticisms, and you should do that and can do that in a paragraph at the end, but be sure that kind of where you're including the rest of the evidence, backing your point, is all in your favor, to make sure that you're doing your best to convince. And then next slide. So avoid jargon. It's really important to use accessible language. A lot of people are not going to be as well researched, and they're not going to be experts like you are, or the people that you're referencing in your op-ed. they may not be in this world every day. They're just kind of doing their daily or weekly duty to read the newspaper. And so make sure you're using language they can understand, even though they're not an expert. So, it's a good idea to use metaphors, analogies. Again, stories are really helpful to kind of connect to your readers, and just will overall help make your point a little more persuasive. Be sure that when you're looking to submit an op-ed, if you have a paper in mind, it's always a good idea to check out if they have anything online about their word count. A lot of papers are sometimes strict about their word count. Usually kind of 400 is going to be on the shorter end and 800 would be at the longer, and some papers don't have any requirements at all, but it's always a good idea to kind of check that out before you start writing, just to kind of keep it in mind. And then as we kind of went through in our exercise, point number 8, start and finish strong. You really want to come out with a powerful argument using that hook, and then closing strongly as well. Name names. It's really important to, if you have a call to action, or if you're looking for, a particular piece of legislation to be passed, that you name the people who are responsible for making that happen. So when your readers are reading about this topic and reading about the solution that you're providing, they understand who the people are who can make that change happen. And often it is going to be, someone in a place of power. So just want to be sure that you name those people or name those organizations or committees who are going to be in charge of that. And then last but not least, proofread and edit. Something that I do, and you may find it helpful, you may not, but just an idea to throw out there is, I kind of take my first draft, I get it there all down on paper. That's kind of like step 1. And then, I may walk away from it, put it down, and then come back, look at it with fresh eyes and say, and read through it and say, oh, there's a better way I could say that, or I could make my argument in a stronger way here in this paragraph, or this sentence is confusing. I'm going to clean it up and make it a little bit shorter and easier to understand. So sometimes it's helpful just to create some space from your op-ed after you've been reading it and writing it for so long. And then, I would do a second proof usually just to look for grammar or typos or other little issues. Doesn't hurt to do that 1 or 2 times before you submit the op-ed to the paper.
Thank you, Katie. And I hope you all take those 10 tips to heart. They are all very important and will leave you with a strong op-ed. And that's it from us. The last message we want to leave you with is to put this workshop to use. We hope that you take the thoughts and advice that you put together today and turn it into your own op-ed that works for your own local context. Pernicia's got one more thing, so I will give the floor to her.
Yeah, I'll be super quick before opening up for your questions, but I just wanted to highlight, because a lot of you mentioned, making sure that young people's voices are heard at the polls. And often when you are writing your opinion pieces, and the drawback or the critique is, well, young people don't have like the civic knowledge, or they don't have this and that. Well, this past Tuesday, right? A bipartisan group of US senators actually reintroduced the Civic Secures Democracy Act. And so I'm copying a link to the summary of the legislation, but this is a great way to show that, making strides towards investing in civics for younger people. This legislation is for K through 12, is a way that we can fight against that narrative that young people are not they don't have the civic knowledge to be able to participate. So just wanted to add that in there because I saw that theme come through the Jamboard.
Love that. And that just makes this all the more topical. So if you check out on the last page of the Jamboard, we've actually put mine, Pernicia's, and Katie's email addresses there, so you can reach out to us at any point. And the Jamboard is all yours as well. So please feel free, you've got your ideas down there. You've also got ideas from this entire session and, applied to your local context. This whole variety of ideas hopefully will be able to spark some really good writing and persuasion from each of you. So thank you very much for attending.
Danny, Katie, we have about 2-ish minutes. Does anyone have any questions for our 2 workshop facilitators today? Okay. Hearing none, thanks everybody.